Sorry about that, babe.
Arcana on the SNES is a game that I've been wanting to play for quite some time. I've had it in quite a few polls, but it never won. Eventually I felt like it was time to take the bull by the horns and play this not so well known dungeon crawler RPG from my favorite era of gaming. Arcana was developed and published by HAL. Yeah, that's right, the Kirby company if you will, and released in North America on the SNES in May of 1992. Which oddly enough ended up being the month, May, where we completed Arcana on stream right here on YouTube. As mentioned, Arcana is a first-person dungeon crawler. The majority of the game is spent, well, crawling in dungeons, with some reprieve of course for the story as well as going back to the town to heal, buy equipment, save, and so forth. The real gimmick for Arcana revolves around cards. The characters and enemies are displayed on cards, usually with an assigned element, and the main character of the game, Rooks, has the ability to use the various cards that can attack, help flee from battle, summon elemental companions, and so forth. The gist of the story of Arcana is as follows. The evil Empress Rimsala was defeated and sealed away by a group of card masters long ago. Flash forward and there were 6 kingdoms established in the land of Elemen. The kingdoms had their disputes and scuffles, but in general they were kind of seen as small and nothing to worry about. But over time these issues became massive in scale, eventually leading to wars, or I guess a civil war, for control of Elemen. The capital of Elemen was Byzance, and there one of the court magicians named Galneon launched a coup against King Wagnall. Wagnall was felled during the conflicts and Galneon took control of the throne. King Wagnall also had 2 daughters who mysteriously disappeared during the turmoil. Will you find them during your journey? Well, I'll let you see that for yourself. Graphically, Arcana is fairly impressive. I find that the HUD and the layout of the game are well displayed. I enjoy the sprite work of the heroes, NPCs, and the enemies, almost all of which have pretty cool battle animations, and the same could be said for the spells that are used in battle. The cutscenes are engaging, the town and shops have a clean look and familiar feel, and the dungeons all feel fairly distinct. I was actually quite pleased by the graphics of Arcana. Musically, Arcana shines brighter than the stars. Composers Jun Ishikawa and Hirokazu Ando did an amazing job. I always feel that an RPG could take the step to the next level with a great soundtrack, or take a step back if it's lacking. Arcana took a giant step forward with its soundtrack. The battle and boss themes are bumping, the beautiful ambience of the dungeon themes help paint the picture of the area that you are in, the upbeat tune of the town segments make you feel like you're regrouping, the main theme is haunting in a good way, and the soundtrack is just great. It's to me by far one of the more underappreciated soundtracks of the SNES. The ones who know, but I think the lack of exposure and overall popularity compared to most other titles keep it kind of in the dark for a lot of retro gamers. Arcana's soundtrack is high up there on the list now for me having played it. Controls and mechanics. Arcana is a pretty traditional dungeon crawler, meaning that at times it can feel pretty clunky. But when you get into the groove, you'll be cruising around the dungeons in no time. Well, until you get into the battles of course, which I will touch on more a bit soon. I have to admit that overall this is probably the weakest technical aspect of Arcana because not only is the game a bit clunky in nature, but so is the menuing. It's just not very intuitive. At times I felt the menuing to be almost laggy. Certain aspects require numerous confirmation clicks, such as using a spell outside of battle to, let's say, heal. And another major gripe I have is the inconsistency in the menuing. For example, on your main HUD, if there's a second page for items or what have you, you have an intuitive arrow system denoting that you could scroll through. But when you're back in the town in a shop, there's no such system, and you can only scroll through by going down the list. It actually took me a little bit to realize that certain shops had more items because I didn't think you could continue scrolling because there were no arrows. You could chalk that up to old game is old, but let's be real, that's inconsistency on the part of HAL and it should be scrutinized. Gameplay and fun factor. Overall, I'd say that Arcana is a pretty fun game. The journey and perils of the dungeons are enough to get any RPG fan hooked. The battle system itself is fairly fun and engaging. Your party consists of many members that come and go, giving some variety to the gameplay. Which I kind of forgot to mention, but this is a turn-based random encounter style setup for the battles. I also found that I didn't need to do too much grinding in the game outside of natural progression and exploration, which is great. Another wonderful addition to Arcana, which is lacking in other crawlers of this era such as Shining in the Darkness, which I clearly enjoy, is dungeon auto-mapping and a clearly visible compass system. There's no spell hijinks, consumable items, or what have you needed in order to figure out where you've been and where you are. I also thoroughly enjoy the Elemental Spirit Companion card system where rooks can control who's on the battlefield, helping give you that extra boost in your fights. And another cool mechanic tied back to that is that they regain HP and MP when you take steps in the dungeon. And if they should perish, they could be revived by the Spirit Healer back in the towns, or later on by a spell that Rooks learns. Now, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows, and here are my gripes with Arcana. The first and most glaring is the encounter rate. I've had people debate me on encounter rates on other videos before, and I want to preface with I love Dragon Warrior on the NES, which features at times insane encounter rates and level caps requiring for grinding. Despite my love, I feel that I can criticize a game, even Dragon Warrior, when I feel it oversteps its boundaries, and Arcana certainly does that. There is no item, no spell, to my knowledge, and seemingly no level caps to ward off encounter rates. Yes, the higher level you are and the further that you go, you seemingly have a higher probability to run from the encounters or use a fog card to escape, but encountering them all together is the main issue, and many times you will literally take a step, make a turn, take another step, and in those 3 motions you've encountered 3 battles. It could be incredibly tiresome, especially as the game progresses. Now, I don't necessarily hate this, but be wary that there are very easy game overs because all it takes is one party member that's a non-elemental companion to die, and that's all she wrote. So be very careful and mindful, and I'd say warp back to town with a return ring or a spell when you feel like you may need to rest and save, which by the way, the only way you can save is back in the towns. But what I do hate is the fact that you get many gotcha boss encounters in the game. You'll just be traversing the dungeon, everything looks fairly similar, nothing really out of the ordinary, and then bam, it's boss time. Not only that, but there will be times where you think you're as safe could be after getting through a boss and getting through a dungeon, and bam, it's another surprise boss fight. There was one stream in particular I almost lost close to an hour and a half of progress due to this. Obviously I was playing the game blind, and all of a sudden my party was stripped down to just Rooks and the Elemental Companion, and this boss fight, I'm not kidding, it literally came down to my last hit that I could withstand. Luckily we were able to get it done, but whew, it was a close call. Also, this has to be mentioned, the final boss was an incredible difficulty spike. This was the only part of the game where I actually had to grind in order to beat it. Thankfully, there was a pretty nice grind spot in the final area which didn't take too long, but man, the final boss could be brutal if you're not at a high enough level. I won't spoil much, but they can do a spell which does massive damage, and depending on RNG, you can get doubled up with this spell, outturned, so on and so forth, and ugh, it was rough. And here's a couple more nitpicky things that sort of grind on my gears at times, but not so much where they are massively negative. You have a pretty small item limit that could be easily maxed out as you progress, and a lot of the spells that you cast will miss enemies a lot. I'm so used to spells in RPGs really just not missing, so overall it was a bit of a shocker and kind of an annoyance. In summation, Arcana is an overlooked title on the SNES. Growing up, I was not really into dungeon crawlers, and I actually didn't complete my first one until about 6 or 7 years ago with Shining in the Darkness. However, games like Arcana make me want to continue to explore the genre. Arcana is challenging, rewarding, graphically pleasing, and features a banger of a soundtrack. Hindered by insane encounter rates, surprise boss encounters, and an out-of-line final boss in comparison to the rest of the game, which did require me to grind extra in order to beat. But all in all, I give Arcana on the SNES a 8 out of 10. I almost gave it a 7.5 out of 10 because the end kind of wore me down, but after taking a few days off before writing this review, I did find the juice to be worth the squeeze, so to speak. If you were looking to get into the dungeon crawler genre, I would highly recommend Arcana, or if you're looking for a game that you might have missed, or maybe you've played it before and you want to replay it, Arcana is certainly worth your time. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to check out my first ever playthrough of Arcana, I will link the stream playlist on the end screen here and in the pinned comment description below. Take care and see you in the next video.